Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a really necessary and I think deeply poignant look at a foundational figure in rock and roll history.
A true pioneer.
A pioneer whose light it shone so brightly for, what, barely 8 months, and yet it permanently changed the musical landscape. We are diving into the life and legacy of Richard Steven Valenzuela, who you know, of course, as Ritchie Valens.
It's funny you say pioneer because when you really dig into his story, you realize that term is almost an understatement. It doesn't quite capture it.
How so?
Well, you have a teenager, a kid, who somehow manages to blend these incredibly deep cultural roots with a sound that was brand new, rock and roll.
Yeah.
And in doing that, he basically creates the blueprint for Chicano rock.
And he achieved this massive crossover success. I mean, something that was just unprecedented for a Latino artist in the 1950s.
Totally unprecedented.
Exactly. So our mission today is to move past the sort of standard summary, the story everyone thinks they know from the movie. We want to really understand the sheer velocity of his rise.
The speed of it is just staggering.
It is. And we want to analyze the calculated business decisions that shaped his identity, that specific historical trauma that haunted him his whole life.
And then the brutal end, the cruel convergence of really awful logistics and just fate. That led to his death at 17.
On that infamous date, the day the music died.
And we have some incredible sources to work with. They cover everything from his Yaqui ancestry, which is fascinating, to the complex history behind his family name.
We'll even get into the specifics of the recording tech they used on his biggest hits. The microphones, the studios, and then, of course, the harrowing details of that final tour.
The Winter Dance Party.
Yeah.
Just a disaster from start to finish.
It really was. We'll be zeroing in on the shocking sort of circumstances that led to his profound fear of flying. It wasn't just a simple fear.
No, it was a deep-seated phobia with a very specific origin.
We'll also look at how the corporate machine shortened Valenzuela to Valens for mainstream appeal, a very calculated move.
A move that tells you everything you need to know about the industry in the 50s.
And to me, the most phenomenal irony of his story surrounds the song La Bamba,
Oh, absolutely.
a Spanish-language rock anthem recorded by a young man who learned the words phonetically. He barely spoke any Spanish.
He had to have his aunt coach him on the pronunciation. It's an incredible detail.
It's a dive that's really defined by contradiction and just raw genius.
It truly is. Let's start at the beginning. Let's unpack the foundation of his talent by looking at his roots, right there in Los Angeles.
So Ritchie Valens was born Richard Steven Valenzuela, May 13th, 1941. He was born in Pacoima, California, right in the heart of the San Fernando Valley.
And what immediately stands out when you look at his lineage is this vibrant cultural convergence. It's the absolute fuel for everything that came later, all his musical innovations.
That environment was everything.
It was. His parents, Joseph Steven Valenzuela and Concepcion Concha-Reyes, they brought a really specific and powerful heritage with them. Our sources confirm they came from Vicam in Sonora, Mexico.
And they were both of Yaqui indigenous ancestry.
Yes, and this is a crucial distinction. It's not just a general Mexican identity. We're talking about specific, deep indigenous roots that connect to the land in the Southwest.
And this brings us to that fascinating historical footnote you mentioned earlier, the surname Valenzuela.
Right.
If his family had Yaqui ancestry, why the very Spanish surname?
This detail it's a profound window into the historical challenges that indigenous communities faced in Mexico around the turn of the 20th century. Valenzuela, as the sources indicate, is not a traditional Yaqui surname at all.
So this is where we need to contextualize the Porfiriato dictatorship.
Exactly. It's critical context.
Yeah.
The Porfiriato refers to that long authoritarian rule of President Porfirio Diaz. We're talking roughly 1876 all the way to 1911.
And during this period, what was happening to indigenous groups?
There's an intense push for what they called national unity and modernization. But what that really meant in practice was often the systematic oppression and seizure of land from indigenous groups.
Including the Yaqui.
Yes, very much, including the Yaqui people. Many were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands, some were enslaved, many were displaced. It was a brutal period.
So, adopting a Spanish surname like Valenzuela, what was the practical, tactical reason for doing that?
It was a survival strategy, pure and simple. Indigenous families would often adopt these more generic Spanish surnames to, try to blend in.
Yeah.
It was a way to avoid forcible removal, to avoid persecution, to sidestep the institutional racism of the period.
So it was a measure of resilience.
A profound measure of resilience
Right.
and adaptation to try and preserve your family, your home.
So Ritchie Valens was born carrying a surname that was, in itself, a testament to a deep history of cultural resistance and adaptation.
That sense of duality is baked right into his identity from birth. Mexican heritage, indigenous roots, American upbringing.
All colliding in one person.
And that complexity definitely informed what you could call his musical diet. He wasn't raised on just one genre. He was absorbing everything the San Fernando Valley could throw at it.
Mixed with the cultural heritage his parents brought with them. Exactly. So on one hand, he's hearing the intricate harmonies of traditional Mexican mariachi music.
Right, and the passionate, complex rhythms of flamenco guitar. That's in the house.
But at the same time, he's soaking up the sound booming out of the radio. American R&B, the driving energy of jump blues, which were absolutely thriving in 1950s Los Angeles.
He was in the perfect nexus, a place where these completely distinct sound worlds could collide and merge inside his head.
And he didn't wait long to start creating his own convergence. He showed interest in music by the time he was 5.
Just 5 years old.
Yeah.
And his father, Joseph, immediately recognized that passion. He encouraged it, got him started on guitar and trumpet. And get this, he taught himself how to play the drums.
The self-taught aspect is just key to understanding his raw, adaptive genius. But the most memorable detail about his early learning has to be his relationship with the guitar.
It's an incredible story. Valens was naturally left-handed.
So standard practice would be what you get a custom left-handed instrument. Or maybe you just restring a right-handed guitar backwards.
Right? That's what most people would do. But he didn't do either of those things.
Why not?
The sources all suggest he was just so eager, so hungry to learn, that he simply picked up a standard right-handed guitar and mastered it the traditional way.
So he didn't switch the strings or anything?
No, he just taught his left hand to navigate a right-handed fretboard and pick. That physical adaptation, I mean, it just speaks volumes about his determination. He literally overcame a physical barrier through sheer force of will just to get to the music faster.
That determination led him directly into the local scene. I mean, he was that kid at Pacoima Junior High School.
The kid with the guitar.
Yes. Long before he was famous, he was already the soundtrack for his friends, playing and singing for them on the school bleachers.
He was building his first audience right there on the playground. And eventually, at age 16, he joined his first real band. This was 1957.
They were called the Silhouettes.
Yeah. And we should clarify, this is not the famous doo-wop group that did get a job. This was a local Pacoima outfit.
He started out as the lead guitarist, but then the lead singer left.
And he stepped up to the mic.
Yeah.
His first formal recorded performance with that group was on June 19th, 1957.
And it was right around this time, as his musical life is just beginning, that he experiences this profound trauma, the event that would cast a lifelong shadow over him.
The 1957 Pacoima mid-air collision.
This is the event that turned a simple fear of flying into a genuine, debilitating phobia.
It's absolutely devastating to read about. The event itself was horrific. 2 military aircraft collided in the air directly over the Pacoima area.
And the wreckage just rained down on the community?
And it did. But the source material highlights this terrifying, cruel twist of fate that really cemented this event in Ritchie's mind.
He wasn't actually at school that day, was he?
No. He was a student at Pacoima Junior High, and the school was dangerously close to the disaster zone. Debris fell on the playground. Students were injured.
But he wasn't there.
On that specific day, Valens was excused from school because he was attending his grandfather's funeral. And this proximity. The fact that he so narrowly escaped being physically present at the scene of this mass trauma in his own community, it didn't offer comfort. It seemed to instill this profound sense of anxiety and maybe even survivor's guilt.
I can't even imagine that level of local community tragedy, especially for a sensitive 15-year-old. It would be paralyzing.
It was. The sources are definitive on this. This proximity to the disaster, this random, terrifying death falling from the sky. It led to intense recurring nightmares.
So this wasn't just a minor thing.
Not at all. It established a significant, profound, and lifelong fear of flying for Ritchie Valens. This is the background we have to keep front and center, because in just 2 years, this phobia is going to collide with the demands of his career in the most tragic way possible. So we leave this exceptionally talented self-taught musician in 1957. He's got this deep trauma, he's playing local gigs, and he's channeling R&B through his traditional roots. Now we enter 1958, and his career just accelerates from 0 to 1,000 miles an hour.
The breakthrough is almost like classic Hollywood lore. In May of 1958, Bob Keane, the owner of a small label called Delphi Records, gets a crucial tip.
And that tip came from a high school friend of Ritchie's, Doug Macchia, who described Richard Valenzuela as the Little Richard of San Fernando.
That comparison is key.
Oh, absolutely. It immediately suggests Valens had that raw, electric, almost feral stage energy of a major rock star, even though he was just a kid from Pacoima. Keane knew he had to see this for himself.
So Keane tracks him down at a Saturday morning matinee at a local movie theater. He was playing with his band.
And he was so impressed by the raw talent that he invited the young man to audition at his home studio in Silver Lake.
And this is where we get a great technical deep dive into early rock recording. Keane's setup was makeshift, but it was surprisingly high quality.
It was. He was using a 2-track Ampex 6012 portable stereo recorder, which was pretty advanced for a home studio back then. And more importantly, he was using Neumann U47 condenser microphones.
Okay, let's pause on that. The technical jargon. Why should the listener pair that he was recorded using a Neumann U47? What does that mean?
Because the U47 is legendary. It is one of the most revered microphones in the history of recorded music. It's the mic that basically defined the sound of the 50s and 60s.
Like who used it?
Oh, everyone. Think Frank Sinatra, the Beatles, countless jazz and pop legends. It has this particular warmth and presence, especially on vocals, that is just unmistakable.
So the fact that this 17-year-old kid from Pacoima was auditioning through this high-end German condenser mic.
It means Keane was treating him not as some local novelty act, but as a potentially massive, high-fidelity star from the very first moment. He was capturing that raw genius with the best possible technology he had available.
And it worked. Keane signed him the very next day, May 14th, 1958.
And this is the moment. This is where the business machine steps in and starts to alter his identity.
The birth of Ritchie Valens.
Exactly. Keane made 2 distinct suggestions. First, Ritchie instead of Richard. He thought it was catchier, a way to stand out from the other Richards on the charts.
And the second one was far more significant.
Far more, shortening Valenzuela to Valens.
And what was Keane's motivation for that, according to the sources?
The stated reason was explicitly to widen his appeal beyond any obvious ethnic group.
Wow, he just said it.
He did. You have to remember, in 1958, the American mainstream market was still highly segregated. While rock and roll owed its entire existence to black rhythm and blues and Latin influences, the corporate music industry often preferred its stars to have a, let's say, a non-threatening homogenized image.
So shortening the name was a calculated business move.
Absolutely. It was to facilitate crossover success, to minimize the visible markers of his Mexican heritage while, paradoxically, exploiting the unique musical fusion that heritage provided.
It's the unavoidable tension of that whole era, isn't it? Taking the talent but sanitizing the identity, it's a bitter pill.
It is. But despite the change, the machine was firing on all cylinders. His first professional sessions were held at Gold Star Studios, and they happened in a remarkably brief single afternoon in May of '58.
Gold Star was another legendary studio. And look at the caliber of the backing band he had on those first tracks. These weren't just some studio hats.
No, these were the creme de la creme of what would become known as the Wrecking Crew. He had Renee Hall, an incredible session musician and arranger. He had Carol Kay, who would go on to become one of the most famous electric bassists of all time.
And the legendary drummer Earl Palmer.
The great Earl Palmer. These musicians added this layer of professionalism and rhythmic sophistication that just perfectly anchored Valens' raw, youthful energy.
So they cut his debut single, Come On, Let's Go, an original credited to Valens and Kuhn, which was Keane's real name, and it was backed with a song called Framed.
And the success was almost instantaneous. It was a hit. But the second release is where everything just exploded into the stratosphere.
That double A side, the one that cemented his legend for all time, Donna, coupled with Bamba.
The perfect 1-2 punch.
Let's start with Donna. It's such a pure, almost heartbreaking high school romance ballad.
And it was deeply personal. He wrote it for his actual high school sweetheart, a girl named Donna Ludwig.
And here again, we find that tension of identity and acceptance.
Yes, the sources note this really poignant detail, that Ludwig's parents actively disapproved of her dating a Hispanic boy.
So this wasn't just simple teenage angst in the song.
No, it was real cultural friction playing out in his private life.
Mm.
And I think that gives the song a much deeper layer of that sort of star-crossed tragedy that really resonated with audiences.
And then you flip the record over, and there's La Bamba. This song didn't just become a hit, it became a cultural flashpoint. It defined a new genre.
The sources credit Valens with adapting a traditional Mexican son jarocho folk song.
Yeah.
But adaptation.
Mm.
It really doesn't capture the revolution he performed on that track.
What did he do that was so different?
He took the traditional often complex rhythmic meter of the folk song, which is challenging and tied to centuries of tradition, and he overlaid it with a driving, simplistic, electric walk rhythm.
He essentially fused old Veracruz folk music with the sound of Los Angeles R&B.
Precisely. You have the complexity of the Spanish language and the folk tradition, but then you have Earl Palmer's signature 44 backbeat just pounding it forward. This transformation was absolutely explosive.
And it became a massive hit.
A monster hit. It sold over 1 million copies, earned Valens a gold disc, and crucially, it made him the defining pioneer of the Spanish-speaking rock and roll movement. This track proved that this kind of cultural fusion wasn't just viable, it was commercially irresistible.
The timeline here is just staggering. He signed in May, he debuts in the summer, and by the end of 1958, he has a gold record.
I mean, that kind of rapid success meant the normal life of a teenager was it was instantly unsustainable.
Right. So by the autumn of 1958, the sheer volume of recording, promotional appearances, touring, it made it impossible for him to continue his education at San Fernando High School.
He had to drop out.
Yeah.
At 17 years old, Richard Valenzuela was a full-time national rock and roll superstar named Ritchie Valens.
And the machine made sure he was seen on every platform that mattered to cement that mainstream appeal as quickly as possible.
The publicity strategy was incredibly aggressive. On October 6, 1958, he appears on Dick Clark's American Bandstand singing, "Come On, Let's Go."
And then he's back just a couple months later.
Yep, by late December, he performed the hit ballad Donna on the Dick Clark Show.
And he wasn't just doing TV appearances, he was sharing stages with the established giants of the era.
He was immediately placed in the major leagues. In mid-December, he joined Alan Freed's Christmas Jubilee show in New York.
And you have to picture this. Here's a 17-year-old kid from Pacoima sharing the bill with Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, Jackie Wilson, Eddie Cochran.
It was a massive affirmation of his status. And during that New York run, he played his one and only show at the legendary Apollo Theater in Harlem.
It really speaks volumes about his character, though, that amid this absolute whirlwind, he took the time to go back home.
To perform for his community. It connects back to that grounded nature we talked about. Following a trip to Honolulu for a big show, Valens returned to his roots. On December 10, 1958, he appeared back at Pacoima Junior High School.
And this detail is so important for music history buffs, because this particular gig has immense historical significance.
It's the only known live performance by Ritchie Valens that was ever professionally recorded.
The only one.
The only one. It was later released as the album Ritchie Valens in concert at Pacoima Junior High.
That makes that recording almost priceless. It's the only sonic document we have of his live stage presence, and it was captured right where he used to sit on the bleachers and play for his friends.
It just shows that even at the absolute peak of his fame, he hadn't forgotten the community that built him.
This brings us to the beginning of 1959. And this next segment is, it's genuinely difficult to discuss because the sources convey a level of just misery and logistical failure that is almost absurd.
That's awful.
This 17-year-old phenom, just months into his fame, is swept up in the punishing 1959 Winter Dance Party tour.
And this tour, which kicked off January 23rd in Milwaukee, was a perfect encapsulation of the brutal side of 1950s rock touring.
It wasn't glamorous at all.
Not even close. It was a grueling schedule. 24 cities in 3 weeks, zigzagging across the frozen Midwest. Valens was billed alongside giants like Buddy Holly, J.P. the Big Bopper, Richardson, Donna the Belmonts, and Frankie Sardo.
The sheer physical logistics of it sound like they were designed to break these young artists.
They were catastrophic. We have to paint a picture of the conditions for you. The Midwest, in late January and early February, we're talking brutal, sub-zero temperatures, constant snow, ice on the roads.
And the tour buses were, well, they were not luxury coaches.
They were old, poorly maintained, and crucially, they were unheated. The heating systems kept breaking. Imagine traveling hundreds of miles between gigs overnight in what was essentially a freezer on wheels.
And the breakdowns weren't just isolated incidents, were they?
No. The source material emphasizes this. The primary tour bus broke down twice in the middle of freezing weather. They were stuck on the side of a frozen highway in the middle of nowhere, trying to make repairs, exposed to the elements.
These are teenagers, for the most part.
Just kids, forced to endure unimaginable physical suffering just to get to the next gig, often in some tiny, equally freezing ballroom or armory.
And the cost of this misery was tangible. It started manifesting in sickness and injury.
Oh, absolutely. The severe cold and the constant stress meant that both Valens and the Big Bopper came down with flu-like symptoms that were just getting worse every day.
And the sources detail even more severe consequences for Buddy Holly's band.
After the bus stalled near Duluth, Minnesota, the conditions were so bad that the drummer, Carl Bunch, had to be hospitalized for severe frostbite on his feet. He couldn't play.
So now the tour had to continue, but without a regular drummer.
Correct. They were already physically exhausted and sick, but now they had to improvise every single night. Valens, Holly, and Carlo Mastrangelo from the Belmonts were forced to take turns on the drum kit, just covering for Bunch to keep the music going.
They were physically depleted, ill, and just desperate for some rest and warmth.
This level of logistical absurdity,
Yeah.
this is what set the stage for that final fateful decision.
Given that level of physical misery, it's completely understandable why Buddy Holly, after the show in Clear Lake, Iowa, was just desperate to find any alternative.
Any way to get to the next stop in Fargo, North Dakota, that wasn't that bus.
The final performance was at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake on February 2nd, 1959. It finished around midnight.
And Holly just looked at the weather, he looked at his miserable tour mates, and he decided he was done. He was not getting back on that bus. He chartered a 4-passenger Beechcraft Bonanza plane.
Tail number N3794N.
From the nearby Mason City Airport. The goal was so simple. Get himself and his bandmates to Fargo quickly, give them time to get laundry done, and most importantly, get some real sleep in a warm bed.
And this is the profound moment. This is where Ritchie Valens' lifelong fear of flying, the one rooted in that Pacoima disaster, collided with the current immediate misery of that tour bus.
It's the ultimate paradox. Valens was terrified of flying, but in that moment, he hated that bus more. He was so desperate to get off that unheated contraption.
He wanted a seat on that plane, but it technically belonged to Holly's backup guitarist, Tommy Alsop.
And that leads to the famous tragic coin toss. We have to set the scene for you.
It happened backstage at the Surf Ballroom. It's a small, cramped area right off the main dance floor. The musicians are loading out, they're exhausted.
Alsop and Valens both wanted that third available seat. Holly was paying for 3 seats for himself and his 2 band members, so they decided to flip a coin for it.
And who actually flipped the coin?
The local disc jockey who emceed the concert, a man named Bob Hale, he acted as the referee and flipped the coin. Alsop called heads. Valens called tails.
And Valens won.
Valens won. And the apocryphal quote attributed to him right after winning is one of the most haunting lines in the history of rock and roll.
That's the first time I've ever won anything in my life.
If he truly said that, it's a line of pure cosmic horror. He just won a flight that would let him escape the cold. But in doing so, he condemned himself to the very tragedy he feared most.
And Alsop later said he just walked away, relieved, thinking he was headed for an uncomfortable but survivable bus ride. He was completely unaware of the fate that had just been determined by that coin flip.
And Valens wasn't the only one who got a seat because of a last-minute change. There was a moment of true selflessness that night involving Holly's bassist, Waylon Jennings.
Right. The Big Bopper, J.P. Richardson, were suffering acutely from the flu. He was in bad shape and desperately needed medical attention and a warm bed.
And Waylon Jennings, who was Holly's bassist, voluntarily gave up his seat to Richardson. Just a kind gesture. When Holly heard that Jennings wasn't flying, he joked with him, "Well, I hope your old bus freezes up."
And Jennings famously shot back,
"Well, I hope your old plane crashes." It was just a moment of dark, tour-weary humor, the kind of thing you'd say when you're exhausted. But it would haunt Jennings for the rest of his life.
So the 4 occupants were set: Valens, Richardson, Holly, and the pilot, a young man named Roger Peterson.
The plane departed Mason City Airport at around 12:55 a.m. on February 3rd, 1959. The flight was incredibly short. It was measured in minutes. It crashed approximately 5 miles northwest of the airport.
What did the official investigation reveal about the cause? It wasn't mechanical failure, was it?
No. The subsequent investigation by the Civil Aeronautics Board pinpointed the cause as pilot error, directly linked to his lack of qualifications for the weather conditions he encountered.
What does that mean exactly?
Pilot Roger Peterson was certified for instrument flying, but he wasn't adequately trained or experienced in flying, strictly by reference to instruments in rapidly deteriorating weather. He was only 21. The board concluded he likely suffered from spatial disorientation, lost control of the aircraft because he misread the instruments while flying into heavy snow, and zero visibility.
And all 4 men were killed instantly on impact.
Yes. Valens was still only 17 years old, the youngest victim.
The coroner's report paints a grim picture. It details that Valens suffered massive fatal head injuries and severe blunt force trauma to the chest. It was a swift, violent end to a spectacular career that was barely 8 months old.
And it was that date, February 3rd, that was ultimately immortalized years later.
By Don McLean's epic 1971 hit American Pie.
Yes. He coined the phrase, etching that date permanently into cultural history as the day the music died. Valens was buried close to home at the San Fernando Mission Cemetery in Mission Hills, right there in Los Angeles. His mother, Concha, was later buried alongside him when she passed away in 1987. It's so vital that we shift our focus now, because the tragedy, though it's profound, it must not overshadow the immense positive influence that Valens exerted. His 8-month career was a time capsule of pure innovation.
He is consistently cited, and rightly so, as the first Latino artist to truly and successfully cross over into mainstream American rock and roll,
Which established him as a forefather of both Chicano rock and the broader Latin rock movement. That mainstream success, it basically gave permission and provided a pathway for every musician of Mexican heritage that came after him.
His inspiration directly fueled artists like Los Lobos.
The blues rock trio, Los Lonely Boys, and of course the legendary Carlos Santana. Valens proved that a distinct cultural background was not a barrier to success. It was an asset. It was a wellspring of new, vibrant sounds the mainstream was hungry for.
And the centerpiece of that crossover, the absolute proof that it worked, remains La Bamba. We need to analyze its revolutionary nature again, because being a chart hit that was sung entirely in Spanish was an absolute anomaly in the late 1950s.
The sheer commercial success of a Spanish-language track, blending traditional Mexican music with rock, it was groundbreaking. Valens' arrangement didn't just borrow the melody, he structurally changed the music by imposing that driving rock rhythm. He created a powerful template for fusion.
What's fascinating to me is that the structural blend he created became the foundation for entire new scenes, decades later.
Precisely. His work proved that Latin roots could anchor high-energy rock music for a national, multi-ethnic audience. This structural model became the essential blueprint for the entire Latin alternative scene that exploded across Mexico and Latin America in the 80s and 90s.
Bands like Caifanes, Café Tacuba,
El Gran Silencio. They all owe a stylistic and intellectual debt to Ritchie Valens' 1958 experiment. He laid the tracks.
But the paradox we mentioned at the beginning, the detail about his language skills, it adds this almost unbelievable layer of irony to his greatest achievement.
It's perhaps the most defining piece of irony in his entire story. Despite creating the definitive Spanish-language rock song, the Valenzuela family, having been raised in the U.S., primarily spoke English at home.
The sources are crystal clear on this. Valens himself knew very, very little Spanish.
He learned the lyrics to La Bamba phonetically. He had to have his aunt sit with him and sound them out, syllable by syllable.
So he was relying entirely on his ear, his raw musical instinct, and his memory to deliver those words. It wasn't coming from a place of genuine linguistic understanding.
Exactly, which makes the performance all the more remarkable. He wasn't translating or composing Spanish poetry. He was accessing the rhythmic purity of that folk tradition and filtering it through his rock and roll sensibility. The power of the track came from the performance, the driving rhythm, and the cultural source material.
It proved that music transcends language barriers, a concept that was extremely advanced for the 1950s pop charts.
And the critical recognition for this pioneering work has been, thankfully, extensive. Posthumously, of course.
He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2001.
And in 2019, his version of La Bamba was selected by the U.S. Library of Congress for preservation in the National Recording Registry.
Which means it's deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant.
That solidifies his place not just as a rock star, but as a vital part of the American cultural fabric.
And beyond the official accolades, his work was continually carried forward by the rock royalty who followed him.
The list of covers and homages is so long. Come on, let's go. Was famously covered by Los Lobos, the very band that would later record the soundtrack for his biopic, and the punk legends, the Ramones.
The ballad Donna was reinterpreted by groups as diverse as the pop-punk band MXPX and the horror punk band The Misfits.
And his influence stretched into the realm of the greatest guitarists of the 1960s and 70s. We're talking about direct inspiration for Jimi Hendrix, who adored his improvisational style, the Beatles, and of course that specific connection with Led Zeppelin.
The Led Zeppelin connection is a fantastic example of the long tail of his influence. Their track, Boogie with Stu, from the 1975 album Physical Graffiti,
was directly inspired by Valens' song, Ooh, My Head. It's essentially a rock and roll variation on that theme, that riff.
And this inspiration eventually led to a legal entanglement, decades after Valens' death.
It did. When Led Zeppelin released the song, they attempted to credit the inspiration, but they incorrectly credited only Valens' mother, Concha, suggesting the tune was a traditional folk song that he had adapted.
Which meant that Valens himself and his publisher, Bob Keane, didn't initially receive proper credit or royalties.
Right, so Keane subsequently filed a lawsuit.
What was the outcome of that suit, and why does it matter today?
The lawsuit eventually resulted in a settlement that provided significant back royalties. But what's really important is the distribution. The result was that half of the awarded royalties ultimately went to Valens' mother, Concha, even though she wasn't the one who initiated the legal action.
So even 20 years after his death.
His brief burst of genius was still generating complex legal and financial ripples for his family. It's a testament to the enduring commercial and structural importance of those first songs he wrote as a teenager. Ritchie Valens' story hasn't just been preserved in music archives and lawsuits. It's been actively woven into the public consciousness through film, monuments, and a huge amount of civic pride.
The most famous way his story continues to live, of course, is through cinema. The 1987 film La Bamba, starring Lou Diamond Phillips and featuring that incredible music performed by Los Lobos, was a huge critical and commercial success.
It introduced his life story to a whole new generation.
And the sources note that cultural appetite is still strong. A new biopic focusing on his life was announced very recently, in August of 2024. It just demonstrates that the conversation about his impact is far from over.
But I find the tribute paid by Tommy Alsop, the man who lost the coin toss, to be one of the most uniquely poignant acts of memorialization.
It's incredible.
Alsop carried the memory of that night, and the realization that a simple flip of a coin saved his life while taking his friends for the rest of his career. So in 1979, he opened a club in Dallas, and he called it Tommy's Heads Up Saloon.
Heads Up Saloon. In direct memory of the coin toss.
Exactly. It wasn't some generalized tribute to Ritchie. It was specifically named for the moment of fate. It's a permanent, personal acknowledgement of the intersection of luck and disaster that happened in that cold ballroom in Iowa.
It ensures that the specific, brutal circumstance that led to Valens' death is never forgotten.
And the crash site itself has become a place of pilgrimage for fans.
Thanks to one fan in particular.
Yes, a dedicated fan from Wisconsin named Ken Paquette. He ensured the location was properly recognized. He personally erected a stainless steel monument near the crash site, about 1.25 miles west of the nearest intersection in that Iowa cornfield.
And it's designed to depict a guitar and 3 records,
bearing the names of Valens, Hawley, and Richardson. Paquette later installed a similar monument in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which was unveiled in 2003.
Valens eventually did receive that mainstream recognition of Hollywood, too, though it was driven by grassroots efforts.
That's a key detail. On May 11, 1990, his star was unveiled on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The $3,500 cost for that star wasn't paid by a corporation or a studio.
It was raised entirely by his family and friends.
A true community effort to ensure his permanent inclusion among the legends of Hollywood Boulevard.
But the deepest, most sustained love and tribute has been reserved for his hometown, Pacoima. His memory there is absolutely preserved and used to inspire future generations.
Pacoima is his eternal monument. In the 1990s, the local Paxton Park was renamed the Ritchie Valens Recreation Center,
which now includes the Ritchie Valens Pool and a skeet plaza.
And the city council member who proposed it stated the goal was specifically to encourage residents to remember his humble background and emulate his accomplishments. She's held up as the ideal homegrown success story.
And they've leveraged public art to make sure his image and story are impossible to forget.
The number of murals in Pacoima is striking. Back in 1985, an artist named Manuel Velázquez created this massive 12 by 20-foot mural on a classroom building at his old junior high.
And it's incredibly detailed, right? It shows his image, his records.
And even a depiction of the newspaper article detailing the plane crash. It's a piece of history right there on the school wall.
And that tradition continued.
It did. In 2012, artists Hector and Levi Ponce contributed large-scale murals on Van Nuys Boulevard, ensuring his image stays vibrant and contemporary. And a physical monument was also built and put on display at Ritchie Valens Park in 2013.
And the official civic honors just keep coming. Decades later, it shows the lasting political recognition of his status.
In 2016, to mark what would have been his 75th birthday, the LA City Council declared May 13th as Ritchie Valens Day.
A couple of years later, in 2018, a section of the vital Interstate 5 freeway in the San Fernando Valley was officially designated the Ritchie Valens Memorial Highway.
And most recently, in May of 2022, the local Pacoima post office was renamed the Ritchie Valens Post Office. These are not trivial gestures. They integrate his memory into the very infrastructure of the community he came from.
So this deep dive, moving from his family's origins in Wickham, Sonora, to that unheated bus in frozen Iowa, it really reveals the profound paradox of Ritchie Valens' life.
It does.
He was a pioneer of Chicano rock whose greatest success was sung phonetically in a language he barely spoke. He achieved this monumental, genre-defining success in a career that lasted only 8 months after his breakthrough.
It's a study in speed and intensity. Every single moment of his short life felt charged with fate. And you see the final heartbreaking irony right up to the very end.
A young man whose deepest trauma was caused by an air disaster, who subsequently had a life-altering fear of flying.
Yet the current overwhelming misery of that unheated bus forced him to board that small plane, overriding his deeper, lifelong terror.
And he only secured that seat by winning a simple coin toss. The irony of winning your own death is, it's just something that is so hard to reconcile.
It speaks to the terrible randomness that defined the end of the first wave of the rock and roll explosion. Yet, the legacy of that self-taught genius who fused indigenous resilience, Mexican folk traditions, and American R&B into something utterly new, it persisted.
His ability to improvise, adapt, and blend these disparate musical styles has echoed through generations. It profoundly influenced artists like Santana, Hendrix, and Led Zeppelin.
He demonstrated an unparalleled ear for fusion at the exact foundational moment that rock and roll was beginning to branch out into all these new genres, and he was just 17.
He was on the cusp of his musical maturity, having already mastered the basics of rock and roll and infused it with this complex cultural rhythm.
So for you, the learner, we leave you with this final provocative thought about the legacy of Ritchie Valens.
We know he was already combining mariachi and R&B. If he had survived that night, if he had lived into the 1960s, a period defined by massive musical experimentation, psychedelia, global fusion, the move toward harder rock, how might the sound of the mid to late 60s have shifted?
What specific, unimaginable fusions, blending his Latin roots with the psychedelic explosion, might this self-taught genre-crossing genius have been on the verge of creating?
It's a question that reminds us that the day the music died means we lost not just the music he had already made, but all the decades of music he never got the chance to create.